Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Ian Mann, and I'm joined on the panel today with Ms. Valerie Warhoon via Zoom and Mr. Richard Whitbread via Zoom as well. The Assessment Department personnel is Abhishek Ratan, and the administrative personnel is Zachary Mohan. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all of the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 6 on our docket today. Mr. Mohan, will you please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony?
Of course, Mr. Chair. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Abhishek Ratan.
Do you affirm that the evidence about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Marcelo Navarro.
Do you affirm that the evidence about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Ratton, if you can turn to please number 1 on the docket, that is the street address of 175 Stadacona. And I'll note, Mr. Mohan, that I have the city's brief on this. I do not have a brief from an applicant. Mr. Navarro, are you the applicant on this matter?
Correct.
Oh, okay, thank you then if you can please, Mr. Ratton, introduce the property at 175 Stadacona and proceed with your evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-1703, roll number 14090253500, property address 175 Stadacona Street. 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $185,000. It has been marked used as vacant commercial. Moving on to page 2 and page 3, I have some photographs of the subject property. It is between Stadacona and it's a parcel between 185 and 111 Stadacona Street. The subject property had a sale back in April 19, 2022 for $1,050,000. It is a multi-role sale with 335 Tweed Avenue. So it's not it's a multi-parcel sale. Moving on to page 6 of my brief, we can see that we have the subject property is 12,260 square feet area with a net rate of $15.01, which brings the land value at $184,000. We have a detached structure for $1,000, which brings the total value for the subject property at $185,000. Moving back to page 5, I have a list of 5 comparables ranging between 2,500 square feet to 59,000 square feet. The subject property is somewhere around 12,000 square feet. So I have 2 comparables. which are almost similar to the size of that comparable number 2 and comparable number 4. Which had a sale price per square feet for $51 and $37.47. The subject property is only assessed at, whereas the subject property is only assessed at $15.01. So I would ask the board to confirm the value for 2025 assessed value for the subject property at $185,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro.
I have no questions, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Wareham, questions?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
Yes, just wish to confirm that this is model-driven evaluation that you provided
That is very right.
and no adjustments?
No adjustments.
Okay. Just a query here. Can you explain why with a mean 51.99 on your comparables, you come down to 15.01?
There is a reason the mean is such high because of our first comparable, which was sold, which had a sale price of $89.78 for only 2,500 square feet. So if we remove that one, the mean should be adjusted back to like $30 per square feet.
Thank you. I wondered about the outlier, so that makes sense. Okay, no other questions.
Thank you. And I don't have any questions. Mr. Navarro, have you a submission?
I don't, Mr. Chair. This property is actually part of another property that we're going to be dealing with, I believe sometime in early February. So it's attached to 335 Tweed Avenue. We consider it basically the same property, one economic unit. So the arguments on this property will be made at that time. And that's the reason that we are confirming this assessment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ratton, do you have any questions or comments with respect to that?
No, I don't have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Whitbread?
No, I have none. Thank you.
Ms. Wareham?
None, thank you.
And I don't have any. Given the position, is there any summary from Mr. Ratton? Any summary?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Navarro?
None from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Then, having heard the evidence, we will conclude this matter and move on to the next matter. That's the street address at 205 Bond Street. Mr. Ratton, if you can please introduce this property and provide us the evidence. And I have an indication here that Mr. Navarro, there will be a request for confirmation on this as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ratton, if you will proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-1573, roll number 0900027120, property address 205 Bond Street. The 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $182,000. The current use for this part for the subject property is vacant commercial. Moving on to pages 2 and 3, I have some subject photographs for the subject property. It is on intersection. It is near the intersection of Regent Avenue and Bond Street. The subject sale history shows that the subject property was sold back in December 14 of 2020 with a consideration value of total $1. This doesn't seem like an arm's sale in arm's length, and I couldn't confirm this because I have not looked into it, but the consideration is $1, which is a strong indication that it is not a true sale. Moving on to pages 6, we can see that the subject property has a net area of 4,623 square feet, which was assessed at $32.29. The building has detached structure of $5,000. So the total value for the subject property comes as land value $177,000, building value $5,000. Total comes at $182,000. Now, again, I have the same sample size from my previous property. For the subject property too. Now, the best comparable and the closest would be for comparable number 3 in terms of the size, because it is 7,529 square feet. Whereas the subject property is again somewhat smaller in size, approximately 4,623. The comparable sale was sold back in June of 2022 for $49.81, whereas the assessed value for the subject property is $38.29. So to confirm, so to conclude, I would ask the board to confirm the 2025 assessed value for $182,000 for the subject property. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, have you any questions?
Mr. Navarro, go first.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Navarro. Yes, thank you for that. I
No worries.
skipping ahead.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitbread.
Okay, thank you. I see you have this classed as vacant land, but it looks like a parking lot to me. Is there a reason it's not classed as a parking lot?
So
And
the reason,
I'm gonna ask this question a number of times today.
so sorry, but sorry, Mr. Woodbank. So the answer for your question is, our model runs on two models, so income and land. Whenever income model is not supported in our model, it automatically changes into land valuation model. So that's what's happening in these cases. The income is not suitable to assess these properties. So we have to go with a land valuation model for these kind of properties.
Let me understand that. Because it's hard to measure the income for this property.
No, so the income value generated by our model for these kind of properties is not enough to recognize the value which the property holds. So whenever income value is less than the land value, the model will change the valuation method and bring it back to the land value, because the income is not supported by that valuation method.
That's doesn't sound right to me, because it sounds like what you're doing then is picking and choosing the highest value for this property, as opposed to giving it a real income-based approach to. Am I missing something in this?
No, the highest and best use as per the model is that it should be as a vacant commercial, because even if we lease it out, the income wouldn't be enough to support the valuation.
In other words, it would provide a very low valuation.
Yes, that's right.
And what's wrong with that?
Because we think the land itself holds more value than what the income is being generated.
Okay. Okay, I see where you're coming from. Thank you. No further questions.
Ms. Warren, questions?
No, Mr. Whitbread answered it. Thank you.
And I don't have any questions. Mr. Navarro.
Mr. Chair, this is absolutely the same case as the previous. So because it is attached to another property, in this case, I believe yeah, we essentially there is another property that it belongs with, so the arguments will be made on that property. I believe that was included in these. I may have submitted on this one, and we were going to ask for confirmation.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Ratton, have you any questions?
No, I do not.
Ms. Warren, questions?
None, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
Yes. Mr. Navarro, is the intent to apply to appeal this property connected to another property on the basis of vacant land or a parking lot? Can you tell me that?
Parking lot. So we would be taking that value off of there. I don't think we actually had any issues with the value itself. It's just that I believe this is what we are intending to do, is to take this value from this property and adjust it from the main holding.
Yeah.
And I just figured out which one it was actually. This is 205 Bond. So we're actually looking at 200 Regent Avenue West, and that is the parent property.
No further questions.
Thank you. I was looking at the map and I was wondering if it was the Regent Avenue West or if it was further on Bond Street, but thank you for clarifying that. I don't have anything else. Mr. Ratton, any summary required?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Navarro?
None for me, thank you.
Then, having heard the evidence, we will conclude this matter and move on to the next item on the list. That is the item at 1171 Concordia. And I see that on this, there is no contest with respect to the valuation. However, there is a request with respect to the liability taxation and the classification of this matter. Have I got that correct, Mr. Mohan, and Mr. Navarro as well, because it's your application?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, then, Mr. Navarro, as you're aware, the onus will be on you with respect to the change in classification and the liability taxation. So I would ask that you proceed, please, with your evidence.
Okay. So we are looking at 1171 Concordia Avenue. On page 2, you can see the assessment summary and the classification and liability breakdown that we are looking for. As you can see, there are 2 splits there. One is for 40S, and that basically notes institutional properties, school tax exempt. And the other one is Class CC20, and that would be residential 2. So that would be any apartment type scenario. And the
Sorry to
reason,
interrupt. Can I get the roll number ready for this property?
of course. So this is 1171 Concordia Avenue, and the roll number is 04007094700. And the file number is 241970. So on page 3, you can see the use of the report and intended user. I'm not going to go over that. On pages 6 and 7, you can see the general location of this property on Concordia. And in terms of the value, again, we are looking for a split on the current classification and liability. So the reason that properties get put into the classification generally coincides with zoning, but not always. So the intended purpose of this property originally was to be some type of commercial property, and hence the reason that the city assigned a CC60 or other. And other is the catch-all. If it is not residential, farm, or some other type of property, institutional property, railroads, that type of thing, it gets lumped into the other category. I don't think I needed to explain that to you. I'm sure most of you knew that already. So the reason for the portioning belongs to what type of development this is. So the development that is going forward is a housing, and it is intended for seniors. So there are 2 portions to this project. It is essentially a facility, an institutional facility, delivering care for the aged, and that's where it qualifies under a certain section of the Act. So section, I believe there is a partial school tax exemption under section 23(1)(b), where it is used by a nonprofit organization, charitable organization, or a municipality as an elderly person's housing unit or hostel, as defined under the Elderly and Infirm Persons Housing Act, to a maximum exemption of 0.81 hectares. Now, this property is under development at this point, so much of this may be moot, simply because the project is not finished. But we thought that we would bring this forward. So the intention of the project is to house to help people who are elderly. This is a nonprofit organization. In the back of the brief, there is a description of the organization regarding Concordia, starting on page 43, and who they are and what they provide in terms of services. And also on page 36, you can see some of their other buildings in terms of what they are providing. So you can see that ours is there in the middle at the bottom, Concordia Village 5 at 1171 Concordia Avenue. And there is also on page 31, noting some more information about Concordia Wellness Projects. Now, the building is not completed yet, so it has not been housed. So the question of whether it should be receiving the exemption on 40S category is essentially up for debate. However, the classification and the intention of the property is to at least house people and not for commercial activity. So that we know of because the construction has started. The project has been approved. And based on the relevant legislation regarding classification, and that starts on page page 16 of the brief. And that is the Municipal Assessment Act, and this is the regulation regarding classification, how it is determined. So, as I mentioned before, the classification that the current property has is other. And that is essentially based on the zoning that goes with it. So we're not completely in denial about the zoning, but zoning doesn't always determine the use of the property and the intended use of the property. And in this case, we do know that the project has already started. It is intended to house people. So for all intents and purposes, this change has already occurred in our minds. And you can see residential 2 on page 21. So undeveloped, unimproved, vacant, or abandoned land that is lawfully usable primarily for a residential purpose on which there may be lawfully constructed a building containing 5 or more dwelling units. From our perspective, that has already been met. So the change occurred previously, construction has started. So we think at the very minimum, this property should have the class 20T classification on this site. The 40S is a bigger issue, and I think that's probably an issue for down the road for when the project is actually finished. But from our perspective at this point, should have a minimum of a class 20T or class 20 in terms of the classification. There's no valuation issue, so there's nothing to debate in terms of the value on this property. Just basically the interpretation of whether we are interpreting the regulation correctly and whether this property is now essentially a residential 2 or as I said, 20 class 20 property. So I am open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Ratton, any questions?
No, I don't have any.
Okay. Ms. Warehun, any questions?
Just one, when is this project deemed to be completed?
I believe the answer was about 3 years, so it's already been more than a year that they've started constructing. So I would think probably in about 2 years it's going to be done.
Okay, okay, that's my question for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
I do. What is the reference date for this property?
The reference date would be April 1, 2023.
And when did the shovels go in the ground for this development?
If you bear with me a second, I can probably give you the exact date.
I do know the answer is September 2023.
Okay, September
So
20.
after the reference date.
Yes.
So you see where the board's hands are tied. We're dealing with a property with a reference date of April 1, 2023, and you're asking us to make a decision on the basis of something that may occur sometime in 2026. Can you explain that?
Well, the hypothetical of the property is that this type of thing actually happens all the time. So anytime we have a new apartment building or anything that goes up after the reference date, we still have to value that property. We still have to put a classification on it. Correct. Timelines are different on this because this is going to take at least 3 years to build.
Sure.
But this type of thing actually does happen in cases where something comes up after the reference date, is built after the reference date, and just at the time of the valuation or the appeals, which is essentially about 2 years after, a little bit less than 2 years after. So in those types of situations, we are working with hypothetical values in terms of what approach we're using and determining what the future use of the property will be. Nothing changes except that we're essentially drawing from the marketplace for our information. We can't use actuals because there are no actuals in place. Yeah.
And I've gone through the act and I've tried to find a section that instructs the board to use hypotheticals as a valuation point. As you can appreciate, we're mandated to deal with the reference point. And what I look at on April 1, 2023 is a big empty field. The photographs are in your evidence.
Yeah.
And I can't find anything that says that we as a board can deal with hypotheticals.
Well, I believe shovels have already gone in. So, but yes, you are bringing up an interesting point. Is what do we do in this type of situation? Well, we are defaulting to land value. So essentially, land value is not the issue, right? Because we're not disputing the land value. We're disputing what the intended purpose of this site is. And from our perspective, because the city has already approved this, yes, likely after the reference date. Nonetheless, sometimes we are forced to make these decisions because these types of scenarios actually do work their way through the system.
So when I look through the act, I understand there is a particular process for making a change to classification and liability, and the onus is usually on the owner of the property, is it not, or the agent of the owner, to process that request to change?
No. So we can make a classification liability change through an administrative application, or we can do it through an appeal. So let's just go back a few minutes where I said that the issue of the classification liability for institutional, that is the school tax exempt portion, which is classification and liability, is more difficult simply because the issue of the building is at question. The building's not there yet.
Right.
Okay. So that is a more difficult argument for me to make. And I recognize that handing over 40S institution school tax exempt classification liability would be a difficult move. So I'm not. I don't think we can support that at this point. The building is not there. I think we can support the other one because we're not changing the liability on that one. It's still taxable, right? We're changing the classification from commercial or other to apartment. And that's where I think we have a good case because we know what's going in there. So there has to be some reasonable knowledge of what is actually going to be on this site. And we know it's not going to be a large commercial property.
But by the same reasoning, Marcello, you know there is no building there. And yet you're asking the board to change that classification. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The trigger point is really determined by the assessor. Because they ultimately determine what the use of the property is.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I think I get your point, and I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm just looking for some clarification here, Mr. Navarro. Leaving aside the school tax exemption or the liability to taxation, the classification you're seeking is pursuant to the regulations that you've included in your appendix, and those are the classification of property and portion values regulation, and those are the ones that were registered October 23rd, 1998. Those are the ones on which you're relying?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm looking under the section of classes of property. You've got residential 1 that you went through, and residential 2. You're seeking a classification here for residential 2, or is it residential 1?
2.
2, okay. And 2 subsection, residential 2 is section 4 sub B, which includes undeveloped, unimproved, vacant, or abandoned land, which we have here, that is lawfully usable, primarily for a residential purpose on which there may be lawfully constructed a building containing 5 or more dwelling units. That's the regulation that you are hoping to bring yourself in order to change the classification on this property to classification 20. Is that correct?
Right. So it's not that specific section. So you can actually see it on page 21.
Yes.
And that would be section B.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 4 sub B. Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking at. Okay. And you're not pressing the exemption from tax or liability to taxation as a result of the.
I don't think it would be.
The building isn't occupied or being used as such.
Correct. As I was prepping for this hearing, that case became more and more difficult in my mind to support. So yeah, I can't support that at this point. The other one though, I think from my perspective, and I could be interpreting the legislation wrong, but I think to some degree we've met that. And as I mentioned to Mr. Whitbread, the property is not going to be a large commercial building. We know the intended purpose of it. It's gone through that planning process. So we think it should at the very minimum have that 20T. 20T classification and liability.
Okay, fair enough. The other question I had was with respect to the looks like a different roll number, 1115 Molson Street at your page 33. Was that just to advance an argument that you might have made with respect to the liability to taxation, or has that got a relationship to 1171 Concordia?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I believe it is on page, I'm just going to flip through these. You can see the different projects that this particular agency actually has.
Right,
And
at page 35.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So
Okay.
other tthan the Concordia Hip and Knee Institute at 1155 Concordia, they are mostly in the business of housing.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Ratton, have you any evidence with respect to, it doesn't sound as though valuation is at issue. Have you any evidence with respect to the classification and liability to taxation?
No, I do not have any for valuation and for classification and liability as an evidence.
Okay, thank you. And there's no evidence. Mr. Navarro, I don't imagine with that there's any questions that you have because there's no evidence on which to, or have no evidence proffered by the Assessment and Taxation Department with respect to the classification issue. So,
No.
And any summary required, Mr. Navarro?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Ratton?
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Then, well, I've skipped over again. Mr. Whitbread, did you have any questions of Mr. Ratton? I know he didn't provide any evidence, but did you have any questions?
No, I'll leave it alone.
Okay. Ms. Wareham, did you have any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, the only question I had is not germane to the determination we have to make. And so we will, having heard the evidence, we will conclude this matter and move on to the next matter. That is the street address on Regent Avenue Northwest, file number, if I can just assume 24-2355. Mr. Ratton, if you can please present your evidence on this matter. As I understand it, the only issue is with respect to the valuation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-2355, roll number 0900770200, property address Regent Avenue West. The 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $1,138,000. Current parcel use is vacant commercial. The subject on page 2 and page 3. On page 2, I have the photographs for the subject property. There was no recent sale history. Moving on to page 5, we can see that we have a net area of 53,407 square feet with a net rent of $21.31. There are no detached structure to the vacant land. So the total value for the vacant commercial for the subject property is $1,138,000. If I have the rent comparables on page 4, I have 5 sets of rent comparables ranging between $34,000 to $106,000 square feet. The closest rent comparable for me would be 420 Chris Lane 3. Approximately the same area size for 59,965 square feet with a sale price of $31.69. And if we look at the mean and the median for my rent comparables, it is around $31 and $33. So I would ask the board to confirm the 2025 assessed value for $1,138,000 for the subject property. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, questions?
Yes, I did have one generalized question. I also had an issue finding comparables that were relevant to this property, but what I will ask the assessor is that I know that he pointed out 420 Chrisland Street. Would you agree that this is just a property with some surplus land that could be potentially developed at some future point? may have some value to the owner. I don't think it's excess land. I think this is basically just some surplus land. You're aware of what the subject is, right? It's essentially some parking and the driveway into what I think is the casino property, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so is the likelihood that that site could be developed in the future likely?
So there could be chances. I don't know.
I
It's
suppose
tough
we
to
could
predict the future right now.
we could put a Burger King, I suppose, in there, but is it likely?
No, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a different scenario. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wareham?
None at this time, thank you.
I'm just trying to orient myself, Mr. Ratton. The Regent Avenue is at the, I'm looking at your page 2, is at the very bottom, and the parking area or the subject property is to the north of Regent Avenue. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I guess the reason why I have the photographs like that is because we don't have any, like I couldn't have the better view for the subject property from the other angles, I should say. I guess at the behind was a railway track, if I'm reminding it, if I remember it correctly. That was the reason, or there was some kind of object, like I couldn't have the better view for the subject property.
Okay, and this irregularly shaped property has
Yeah.
has a structure or has a portion of a structure on it. Is that correct as well?
There is a small structure that is covering a part of it. Yes, that is correct.
Are there any easements on this property allowing for the construction of this structure, just because it looks as though it's attached to the main structure to the north?
Yes, it is attached to the main structure in the north, but I couldn't speak for any of the easements. I didn't verify them at the moment, so I wouldn't be able to confirm that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Navarro.
Okay. I don't believe this has a civic address. So again, this is roll 00900770200. And it is, I guess, Regent Avenue West. You can see the assessment summary on page 2, on page 3, intended use of the report and intended user. On page 6, we see some pictures of the property, and you can see the configuration of the property. It is essentially what I would call a driveway / parking lot, and the general location north of Regent Avenue on page 7, along the railway tracks. So for this property, obviously we're going through some of the same questions as the assessor in terms of what to look for in terms of a value. So we have a set of comparables there. We drew from those, and obviously we made an adjustment downward to about $1650 per square foot, or 883,000 rounded. The reason for that would be is that I mean, from our perspective, it really can't be more than what its current use is. I don't think there's really much development potential for it. I also did not look into the easement and the overhang there that you're speaking of. But our value is based on a judgment call. So some of the other ones, some of the other properties that I look at in terms of our comparables would have that facility for developing. And I don't think this one has that. So that is the reason why we valued it lower than the sales that we've looked at. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ratton. Any questions?
Yes, is there a specific reason why all the sale dates are around like 2016, 2017, and 2018? Like these are pretty old sales, when compared to our valuation, reference dates.
So it would have been from the sales that we draw from our sales data. But it would have been specific to, I guess, that eastern side of the city, because as you can see there, in terms of the market region, they're all coming from East Kildonan or Transcona. So in this case, we would have looked at certain factors, size in particular, or the area, and we would try and draw from that. But probably because we simply didn't have as many good comparables for this type of property, that would be the best answer.
And also like, shouldn't, since you did a downward adjustment, looking at the subject property, as you mentioned, wouldn't there should be a time adjustment also because of the previous sales, like our old sales?
Yeah, I mean, time adjustments are difficult because, I mean, it's hard enough finding the sales to compare this property with, but finding paired sales it is even harder. So specifically to answer your question, yeah, there probably would be some type of adjustment based on time, but I don't know what that is, simply because there's just not enough paired sales in the marketplace to accurately predict that growth in value over time.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro.
Mr. Whitbread, have you any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Ms. Warren, questions?
None, thank you.
The comparisons that you've used, Mr. Navarro, are they developable? I guess I'm not even sure that's a word, but are they in a similar position with respect to the subject property, and the development is problematic, or have these sales of the comparable properties, are they in a position to be developed, or do you know?
No, I think the properties that are in the chart that I provided can be developed.
Okay.
Whether they've been developed since they sold, that's another question. I don't know. I didn't look at the future of those, but
No,
yes,
that's
yeah.
okay. Thank you. That was my only question. Mr. Ratton, any summary?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Navarro?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Then, having heard the evidence, we will conclude this matter and move on to the next file, that being the street address of, no street address, but the Dumoulin, the file number being 241486. Mr. Ratton, if you can please introduce that property and provide your evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-1486, roll number 0609340700, property address Dumoulin 3. 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $532,000. It's a model driven assessed value. The current use parcel use is vacant commercial. The subject property is between of Rue Dumoulin and Rue Saint Joseph. There was no subject history sale. The subject property has an area of 10,892 square feet, which is assessed at $47.47. And there is detached structures for $15,000. So the subject property assessed value comes at $532,000. All of my rent comparables are listed on page number 4. The mean and the median for my rent comparables is around $92.42 and $95 as a median. Since my rent comparables are from the Exchange District and the downtown section, there weren't enough rent comparables in the provincial section to support to come across. So that's from the downtown and the Exchange section. Now the closest would be in terms of area would be my comparable number 3, which is 11,140 square feet, but it's a sale price was $95.15. So to confirm, I would ask the board to confirm the 2025 assessed value at $532,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Navarro?
Yes. Bear with me. I'm just, Mr. Rattan, you would agree that this is a parking lot, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the comparables that you've given me are predominantly parking lots? Primarily?
Yes, that's
Okay. So I noticed that you have 633 McDermott Street and 170 Bannatyne. These are in the Exchange District, correct?
that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that these are, first of all, high use properties in terms of their location in the downtown?
That's correct.
Okay, and also 360 Hargrave Street, 35,997. That's just a big open lot, correct? I believe there is a future development starting on that property, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And Donald Street again is in the multiple use sector. That is right in the heart of the downtown. And would you agree that that's more high use in terms of the amount of people that would be using that site and, for parking?
That's correct.
Okay. I did have one question regarding the sale on 641 William Avenue. Are you aware if it actually contained another property at 883 Sherbrooke Street? So if you turn to your page, I believe it's on page 8 that you have that sale. Okay. So to the left of it is a commercial building. I believe it is attached to this property as well, or services this property. And just to the north of the adjacent property, across the back lane, you can just make out a single car there. That is 883 Sherbrooke Street. Are you aware if these two sold together, or was it a single property that sold?
No, I haven't. I don't know. I do not know about that.
Okay. Okay. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. Mr. Whitbread, have you any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Ms. Warren, questions?
None, thank you.
Mr. Radden, I'm just going to ask you to confirm, please. It was an answer you gave with respect to another property as to why this was valued as vacant land, vacant commercial land, as opposed to a parking lot. It's clearly being used for a parking lot. Why is the City Assessment and Taxation Department assessing this as vacant commercial land?
So what happens is the city has two models to assess the properties. So our general the subject property should be assessed as on income approach, but the income approach was pretty less in amount when was even was it doesn't have that much value even to support the land valuation. So the city model automatically turns into a land valuation, land valued approach for these kind of properties. Since the income approach wasn't supporting the model itself and it was less than the land value. So the model itself chose land value for the subject property.
And of the comparables that have been selected, do you know if those were? Nope, never mind. I'm not going to continue that. That would invite speculation. I don't have anything further. Mr. Navarro, your evidence, please.
Okay. The address for this property is 0 Dumoulin Street. So we have our assessment summary on page 2. If you turn to page 6, you can see some overhead pictures of this property. It is used as parking. On page 9, you can see our approach. We didn't have the relevant data from the client in terms of the income to put on this property. However, we do sometimes rely on the city's own parking data to come up with some type of value that makes sense to us. So we have a 22 stall parking lot. This property is in the area outer downtown. And so we've put a rate of $48 per site times $12 times 12 months. That gives us an annual income of $12,672. And we've put a 5.5% cap rate on that property. So the end value is $230,400 on page 10. Now, I'll ask you to turn to the parking study that we actually submitted along with this property, and I hope you all got it. Was that in the evidence?
No, I do not have a copy of that. It's not part of the
Oh, okay.
it's not part of the brief, and I don't have anything with respect to no, I don't have any additional parking evidence submitted. Mr. Mohan, do you have anything that should be forwarded to the board?
Let me take a look, Mr. Chair.
I'm just going to check the submission date, Zach, just because I'm pretty sure I did submit this actually.
Set the brief.
Okay, according to the agenda at this item number 5, the Altus 2025 downtown parking study was received electronically January 7th. Is this something you can address verbally, Mr. Navarro?
I can address it either way, but I believe I actually did submit this in evidence.
The agenda
Yeah.
looked as though it was. Yes.
Yeah, let me, a couple more moments, Mr. Chair, my apologies.
Okay.
If you'd like, I can actually start verbally.
Yes, we do have the parking study on file, correct? I can deliver this to the panel as well as any.
If you can deliver to the panel, please, and Mr. Navarro, I leave it to you. If you would prefer to have it distributed and have us review it, we can take 5 minutes and then you can continue, or you can start your presentation verbally. I leave it to your preference.
I think I can start verbally. I don't know if Mr. Whitbread, I don't know if you've been on some of my parking lot appeals this cycle, have you? Because I would have presented it this.
Yeah, I think we have.
Yeah, this study goes around quite a bit, so I believe at one time or another somebody from Altus Group probably would have presented it to you. I can actually present the relevant facts of this,
Okay,
which I show, and I can do it verbally actually. So much of the evidence in the parking study actually pertains to the use of parking, the management structure, parking rates, and also highest and best use, which is an important issue. So highest and best use is actually the more important issue in this debate, and it has been a bit of a debate with the city of Winnipeg. So our belief is that if a parking lot is being used for parking, that is its highest and best use. And we do know that from the literature that parking is viewed as a transitional use. However, many of these parking lots often remain parking lots for decades and decades. I mean, there are some parking lots in the downtown that have been parking lots since the 1950s. So the argument to say that land value should be used is, in our opinion, incorrect. Another assumption that we think the assessors make that is incorrect is using sales of the property to come up with some type of land value, knowing that those values on those sales was specifically derived from the parking income that those properties actually sell for. And when these properties are being exchanged in the marketplace, they're not selling for their land value. They're selling for the income potential, especially the ones in the downtown. People specifically are looking at projecting what type of growth they're looking at in terms of the parking revenues and projecting. We know from our conversations with parking owners that that's the way they do it. So those values translated to land are very specific to those specific locations. So you see an incredible variance in terms of land values from one lot to another. Well, that's really a reflection of the income on the property because they sold as income. They were bought based on the income. They weren't bought on the land value. So the assumption that the assessor is making that they can just take the land value that's produced from the sale, which sold because of the income, is incorrect to begin with. Now, we know that in certain cases, the land value is completely wonkers and it doesn't even reflect the income value of the parking. And that's often cases where we see the transitional side of a transaction. So many of you would be familiar with a sale that occurred on the corner of York Avenue and Donald Street, where there is a building that is going up there. It was delayed for some time. I believe there are some issues with the original owner, and then I believe another owner took it over, and now it's and now I believe at this point they've started construction again on it. So that particular property used to be two parking lots side by side. And they are also in the parking study. I note that because that sale was completely, was much higher than the income potential of the property that we noted. So we knew that when it sold, it wasn't selling as a parking lot, it was selling as something else, which was an assemblage for future development of a high-rise apartment. So from our perspective, there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of what the assessors are doing. Now, they're applying the land value, looking at it, distributing it over the city, but not realizing that those values are very specific to those properties being determined by the income. They're selling for their income. So we don't understand why they're not being assessed based on their income. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Radden, have you any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you for giving me a chance. So, Mr. Navarro, we used a cap rate of 5.5% in terms of valuation for the subject property.
Yeah.
What are the reasons for using 5.5% cap rate for the valuation?
Well, if you, I'm sorry, this is where having the report probably would have been helpful. So I can just go over some of the sales that were on page 19 of the report. So we calculated the cap rate for 126 King Street to be 6.73. 126 King Street is in well, it's part of, I'm not sure if it's actually part of the exchange or just north of it. Pioneer Avenue, there's another sale on there, 27,000 square foot parking lot. We calculated the cap rate to be 5.08. That property is in the heart of the downtown. 330 Donald Street, we calculated that cap rate at 5.38%. 124 Bannatyne, we calculated at 6.04. So there's quite a few of these sales in that report. So these are mainly in the downtown. So the cap rates are ranging, I think, between, I can tell you right now, they're ranging between 4.65 and all the way up to 6.04. And these properties are mainly in the downtown. So we think that 5.5 for a property that's outside of the downtown would be quite appropriate.
Thank you.
Sorry, just going forward, panel, it is currently available in the SharePoint. Just to, and for clarification, A&T did receive the studies, it was just the panel that unfortunately got a minor error, let's call it that.
Thank you, Mr. Mohan. Mr. Ratton, did you have any other questions?
I know, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Ms. Warehun, have you any questions?
I know they've been answered, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
Yes. So again, we're caught in this conundrum of having an April 23 reference date as a vacant commercial land. And yet you're asking us to value it as a parking lot. How long has this piece of property been vacant? Mr. Navarro, can you explain that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I would call it a vacant lot.
Okay, I'm sorry. How long has this property been a parking lot?
I
I
think
can't see it as that, unfortunately, but you tell us.
Yeah, I think as long as the adjacent apartment or condo building has been there.
Are we talking decades?
I think that condo is from the mid 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not prior to that necessarily.
No, not prior to that development.
So why does the city continue to, I know this is tough for you to answer, classify it as a vacant commercial lot?
Well, good question. I've convinced them in the past to flip it around, so I don't know why they keep doing it.
Okay.
I honestly don't know. It should be valued as a parking lot. It's
So
being used.
why don't you apply again or have your owner apply again to have it repurposed?
Oh, oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yeah, so they've put the classification, and I'm not talking about there's two forms of classification, but they're calling it VCOM land, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yes. So the administrative application generally tends to be for cases where not only is there a classification issue, but there's a liability issue as well. So in those cases, we do the administrative application. For example, that property on Concordia, when that building is finally erected, we go for the classification and liability, we likely will do it through an administrative process. But this property, from our perspective, I don't know. I believe that the assessor is making a mistake because it has been a parking lot for some time. And we've corrected the value in the past. based on the parking parameters. So, I mean, I could look back into my records and see exactly what they've done in the past, but I haven't submitted that evidence, so I don't think it would be fair to the
No.
assessor or the panel to look at that.
No,
But I believe in the past we have valued it as a parking lot. So
now
um,
you've heard evidence from the assessor this morning on another property, and I'm betting if I ask him the question, he's going to make the same reference point that when you take a small parking lot like this, the values generated don't warrant what the land is valued or should be valued at. It's kind of the way I interpreted his response to another property. Is that a fair comment?
well, I would say that in the sense of this property being out in the outskirts of this, or not the outskirts, outside of the downtown,
Yeah.
Parking lots in general for this type of property aren't really in demand, and they tend to be part of the building, the zoning bylaw. So there is a requirement for parking for most types of properties, whether it be residential or commercial, outside of the downtown, just based on zoning. And we tend not to value those lands to begin with. So
Let me just take it back. Mr. Chair, may I redirect a question to the assessor?
Certainly, yes.
Mr. Assessor, can you tell me why you're valuing this as VCOM land again and not a parking lot?
So, like I mentioned earlier, was whenever we generate the values for our properties, if the income approach isn't supporting the land value or has the value lesser than the land, our model switches it to a land valuation. That's the first reason, and in order to support, the second reason would be, I would say that our model and assessors, when we do the modeling, think the highest and the best use for that property would be as a VCOM.
That's pretty much what you said earlier on,
Yes,
on another property, isn't it? Yes?
yes, yes.
Yes. Who makes the judgment call in the case of which method of valuation to use? You or other people?
It's the other people. We don't have that judgment call with us right now.
Okay. So I come back to you, Mr. Navarro. I think I judged the response correctly. And as we can see, when we look at your value, it's half the value almost of what the city has come up with using the income approach. So
right.
I'm going to leave it there. I have enough that I can make a decision. Thanks. No further questions.
Thank you. I have a question about the land use as a parking lot, Mr. Navarro. I think you indicated that there's 22 stalls here, 22 stalls here in your income approach,
Correct.
but there isn't full effective use of this land as a parking lot. The pictures that you have, both the overhead and the front street, I assume that's from Dumoulin Street, shows there's fenced off grassed area, both to the, I think that's probably the north and the east. I got those directions right?
So on page 6 at the bottom, you can see the fence line
Yes.
with some overgrowth on top of that. So those would be the trees. I don't know exactly where that fence line is in relation to the property line, but it does seem like it's inset a bit. So I'm not sure why they put the fence there.
Okay. The allowance, or sorry, the evaluation that you've got is simply for the stalls. There's no allowance for extra land that may be part of the, well, not maybe, that is part of this parcel, but not being used as a parking lot?
No, there is no additional value for that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further. Mr. Ratton, any summary?
No, okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Navarro, any summary?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, I know there's one property left with respect to this, and if my math is correct, I believe we should proceed with this before we take a break, just because I don't expect this property to take a very long time. Is that fair, or does anyone need a break?
No, I think there's a request to confirm on this, so
Yes.
I agree. I think it's gonna be very fast.
Okay, then, Mr. Ratton, if you can please go to the address on Provence, number 6 on the list, that being the file number 24-3189.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-3189. Roll number is 0606132400. Property address Provence Boulevard. 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $562,000. Its parcel use is vacant commercial. The subject on page 2, I have the photographs for the subject property. Moving on to the page 5, we can see that the subject property has a 6,771 square feet area with a net rent of $81.38. We have detached structures for $11,000, which bring the total value for the subject property as $562,000. Page 4, I have 5 rent comparables for the subject property, with a mean and a median for $98.95. So to conclude, I would ask the board to confirm 2025 assessed value at $562,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Whitbread?
I have none, thank you.
Ms. Warehun?
None, thank you.
And I don't have any questions. Mr. Navarro?
As I stated with the 2 previous cases, we're looking at confirmation on this one because it is tied to another property as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ratton, do you have anything to ask Mr. Navarro for that?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Warehun?
Sorry, none, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
I have none, thank you.
And I have no questions. I'm assuming the summary is not required. And so all of the evidence has been heard with respect to this matter. We will conclude this matter, and that concludes all of the matters on the docket today. Thank you very much, Mr. Navarro and Mr. Vitale.
Mr. Chair, I think there's one more.
I don't have one more.
File 242231.
No,
We only
Actually moved, I guess.
I do not have one more file. Mr.
Oh.
Mohan?
I have no record of another file myself, no. What was the address for that? Mr.
Moralbo Avenue West.
I believe, let me verify that with you for a moment.
That was actually before it was in this same hearing, but I guess that was moved to.
It got moved.
It got moved to another hearing.
Okay, okay.
I don't remember the date. Yeah, it actually got moved.
Yeah, 2231 Moralbo, correct?
Yes.
Yes, it is moved to February 6th.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, now having jump-started my attention, I think we've now concluded everything. Mr. Navarro, Mr. Ratton, thank you very much for your presentations and your time, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
And Rich, Valerie, why don't we take
just a break now?
Yeah, I want to take about 5 minutes or so and go warm up my coffee, or do you need a little more?
I'll need just 10.
Okay, 10 minutes is good. We'll see you back here about 2.